So I asked the labels in our Facebook group to let me know how many releases per year they like to release. And surprisingly, the answers were all across the board. The first person who responded said that they release 500 releases a year. That's almost 2 releases a day. Now, I don't know. I assume a lot of them are digital only. Probably most of them are singles, or a lot of them are singles. I don't really know the arrangements of that. There was another label that said weekly, which again, I'm lazy and old. That's a lot. That sounds like a lot of releases for a record label to do is weekly. There was another label that said monthly. I think that's pretty, I can handle that. I can handle monthly 12 times a year. Then quarterly, I really like the idea of quarterly. Maybe what you do quarterly, that's like spring, summer, fall, winter, that kind of stuff. So maybe what you do is like one major release each quarter and then sprinkling about singles and little EPs here and there. And then for me, I got to the point because I was so busy with this channel and with other record labels in our community. For my own label, I really am only able to focus on one major full length a year. There might be a single or something else every now and then, but I can definitely do one a year. So this just goes to show you there is no answer to this question of how many releases is appropriate for you and your record label and the artists on your record label. I mean, really the answer is anything, whatever you can handle. If you can handle 500 a year, then do 500 a year. If it's only one a year like me, then that's good too. You can do whatever. There really is no truth. There's no true answer. But today, I want to talk about 5 things to keep in mind, regardless of the amount of singles, EPs, full-length albums you choose to release each year for your record label. There's 5 things I want you to keep in mind. Let's dive in. Before we do, I want to give a shout out to my friends at Infinite Catalog. They are a royalty accounting software. So basically, if you start a record label, you need to make sure your artists get paid. But before you do that, you need to find all of the revenue that you're making at your label from things like CD Baby or Symphonic, your digital distributors, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, your publishing royalties. If you're selling stuff at shows or on your own website, you got to take all of that monthly or quarterly revenue and then somehow figure out how much you keep and how much goes to your artists. Well, our friends at Infinite Catalog have a beautiful program for this. It's an online software. It's super simple. It's easy to use. It's ideal for labels of all sizes. Like even if you're making $50 a month, it's still great for you. They calculate all this data in a really beautiful way. You can see a sample of it by going to infinitecatalog.com/other record labels, where you can get a discount code from me, as well as like a walkthrough of how the software works. Most importantly, it helps you pay your artists fairly and transparently. Okay, there's 5 things to keep in mind, regardless of how many releases per year you do. Number 1 is just make sure it's sustainable. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, if you're doing 500 releases a year, can you do 500 releases every year? Or is it you blow out everything you have now and then you have nothing to release next year? If you're thinking weekly, just look down the pipeline. How many releases and how many artists are you working with? Are you working with 52 artists or artists that are prolific enough, maybe 5 artists who can release 10 times a year or 10 artists who can release 5 times a year? If your pipeline has that much content infinitely, then you can stick to that schedule. My point is that I really do think it's important that whatever release schedule you find is that you keep it consistent. I think that will help your fans know what to expect from you. Think of like a record club. That's why, like, if you release something every month of the year, even if it's just a Christmas album or a compilation in December, or like some other like remix thing that you release in the summer. But if you release something every month, then your fans start to get used to that and they kind of anticipate it and appreciate it. So I do think no matter what you choose for your frequency is that you at least just keep it consistent. And not only should it be sustainable, but it should be something that doesn't burn you out. So if you can do 12 releases in one year, great. But can you do 12 releases the next year and the next year? So maybe, even though you can do 12 releases, how about we just do 6 releases, one every other month? Then it kind of takes the pressure off of everyone. Number 2 is be intentional about your release date. Think about what time of year is ideal for this album. If it's a summer album or a summer feeling album, then release it in June or May, just before summer or during the summer. Think about what else is happening in the world. Obviously, we can't know when other major artists are going to release music, but we can know when elections are going to be happening or when the holidays are happening and things that we might want to avoid, or even things in our own lives that we might want to avoid, knowing that we can give our full attention to this release. Number 3, each type of release, whether whether it's an EP, a single, or a full-length album, or a remix, or whatever, each type of release requires a different level of promotion. That's why it might be possible for you to release 500 releases every year. Because what if only 5 or 10 of them are major full-length records? What do I mean by that? Well, think of an artist on your label. Maybe they only release a full-length record every 2 or 3 years. So when that time comes along, they deserve your full attention. This album deserves a full lead-up album campaign and a post-release album campaign. I have videos about that. Just search my site, otherrecordlabels.com. I talk a lot about releasing, pre-releasing, and post-releasing, release day, all that stuff. But these albums that only come out every 2 or 3 years, you need to make sure they have their own day in the sun. Now, what about like a single that is maybe a B-side single, or it's just a holiday tune, or it's a cover song, or maybe it's from an artist who releases something all the time? Well, you don't have the same level of promotion normally that goes into a remix album or a single than you would into a full-length record from an artist that only releases music every 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. So keep this in mind when planning out your releases. Put a further distance between your major flagship releases, like your big full-length records that fans are anticipating and that artists are really proud and excited of. But if you have an artist who's like done a side project of like super weird experimental music, maybe like slot that in between so it doesn't steal the thunder from some of these other higher priority releases. Number 4 is save something for later. Let me explain. When I started my label back in 2010, our first major full year was 2011. And it was a pretty big deal, and everybody was excited, and all of our artists were being very creative and prolific, as was I, and we had a ton of releases. I think we ended up doing 12 major releases, like full lengths and EPs. That doesn't include singles. We did a documentary as well, music videos. That doesn't include those. We did 12 releases. Almost every release was like stepping on the toes of the album that had come out just a few weeks earlier. My biggest regret, I really regret that, because then what happened was our first release was in January and our last release was sometime in November. Well, the start of the next year, we had nothing. We had nothing to release. All the artists were burnt out. I was burnt out as a label owner. And we basically had nothing until the following fall. It was kind of embarrassing because we were super active and then everyone was like, where did you go? Remember at the beginning of this video, I said, it's more important that you're consistent. It doesn't really matter the frequency. It matters just that you can stick to something that your fans can rely on. Otherwise, they'll forget about you. They'll be super into you and then you'll stop releasing like I did for 10 to 12 months and they'll kind of forget about you. So save something for later. Even though you could possibly fill in every single month this year, just wait. Now, I know what you're thinking. Some of your artists will be like, I don't want to wait on this. I want to start working on my next record. Well, in my example, I had an artist that had worked on a record for a couple of years, and we were releasing it in September. But there was another band that we were releasing in October, and another artist we had released just a few weeks earlier in September. I wish I had said to that band, can we just hang on to this full-length record that I think is really special? Not tell anybody about it, not show it to anyone, just get it all ready, start planning the music video, planning the promotion campaign. Let's hang on to it till January or February and drop it when there's nothing else happening. I really regret that. So even though you might be able to release quite frequently, maybe just hang on to stuff and save something for later and be just a little more intentional with all that. Don't let your releases cannibalize each other. Number 5, finally, most importantly, cater to your artist's needs. Your artist needs financially, emotionally, and creatively. Allow your release schedule to be flexible for how prolific and creative your artists are. If your artist released this big, exciting flagship record in February, but then they just so happen to have a kind of wild and out there lo-fi EP that following October, let them release it. Yeah, you can coach them on saving something for later, and maybe they're just really excited about it now. But if you kind of continued to work and promote that previous record and then wait till the new year, or maybe you hear this album and you're like, this would be better released in the winter. There's these like advising things that you can do. I totally agree about that. But I also think it's just really important that we cater to their creativity. And if they want to release something really quickly, or maybe the opposite, but maybe they're just slow at recording and writing and they want to take their time and maybe they only want to release every 3 or 4 or 5 years or 10 years. We kind of have to cater to their needs. Even if our release schedule says we need to have something out every single month because Scott told you to be consistent, well, don't pressure your artist to be creative. I like to pressure my artists to release their demos or the things that are kicking around their hard drive, even though they may not want to. I'm like, yeah, let's put it out there. So I break my own rules, but fit your schedule to their creativity, not the other way around. Okay, that's it. I think I'm going to include the notes from today's episode at otherrecordlabels.com/quantity. I know that's a weird thing, but it's just a good way to find it. The link is in the description below. Another huge shout out to my friends at Infinite Catalog. You know, it doesn't really matter how many releases per year you do. Like, that's the end result. I mean, there are no rules. I guess if I were making a rule, I would say be consistent. I mean, if you release 12 records this year, one record next year, no records the year after, and then 50 records the year after, I just don't think that's a great way to kind of stay top of mind with your fans or to stay connected with your fans. There's this label I've been talking about on the podcast recently, and they do this summer comp. And I don't know much about it, but I've bought it for the past 3 summers, and it's become like my soundtrack of the summer. And now, when summer is approaching, I'm anticipating this compilation. So lucky for me, they've been really consistent. And this is just me as a music fan that follows a record label. And so I kind of encourage you to do that, is to be consistent no matter what. But at the end of the day, your release schedule is your release schedule, and you can do whatever you want, whatever quantity is right for you. Go to otherrecordlabels.com/quantity to get the notes from today's episode and to read more and to download some of our resources for independent record labels. And by the way, again, thank you to Infinite Catalog, your best option for managing your royalties and making sure your artists get paid if you do have a record label, if that's you. So listen, before you go, please, in the comments below, let me know, for your record label or if you're an independent artist, how many releases per year are you doing? And you can break it down. If you're like 1 full length, 1 EP, 2 singles, and then 1 kind of like wild card, whatever, live album, remix album, I don't know. Let me know like what you aim for, whether you're an independent artist or you're a record label. I really want to know. Yeah, thanks for watching.